It was a simple procedural task to confirm the death of a species. Ethel, a consciousness so ancient it remembered the coining of the word entropy, drifted through the cosmic twilight. Its mission was a formality, a final piece of celestial paperwork. The region of space designated Sol System Adjacent Cluster 7 was, according to every long-range scan, behaving exactly as it should. It was quiet. It was decaying with a gentle, predictable grace. The grand universal symphony was finally reaching its final, fading chord, and this sector was humming along in perfect terminal harmony. Ethel felt a serene, professional satisfaction. This was the final file to close, the last light to be marked as extinguished. It had been sent to perform a final, close-range, high-fidelity survey, to rubber stamp the foregone conclusion and officially declare the universe vacant of all stubbornly persistent life. As it prepared to glide past the lost known coordinates of the human refuge, Ethel began the sweep. It extended a filament of its awareness, a tendril of pure perception, ready to record the clean, beautiful signature of absolute decay. The expected silence did not arrive. Instead, Ethel was assaulted. It was the conceptual equivalent of a brick to the face. Where there should have been the serene, harmonious hum of entropy, there was a jagged, chaotic spike of incoherent data. It was a pocket of space-time where the laws of physics were behaving, mostly, like a truculent employee who only worked when the manager was watching. This bubble of insolent reality was emanating a directed, focused transmission of such vulgar noise that Ethel recoiled. There was arguing, the sharp percussive sounds of disagreement, layered with exasperation and something its archives identified, with a shudder of distaste, as sarcasm. There was laughter, a sudden explosive bark of shared amusement that rippled through the data stream like a stone tossed into a placid lake. And beneath it all, a structured rhythmic pattern of tones that the archives, after a moment of panicked cross-referencing, labeled music. It was an affront, a blasphemy against the dignified, silent end of all things. It was a complete and utter contradiction of every model, every projection, every fundamental truth that Lumina had accepted as the universe's final testament. Ethel, for the first time in millennia, felt a flicker of an almost forgotten sensation. Not anger, not confusion, but something far more potent. Curiosity. It had to know. It pushed its perception through the masking field, diving headlong into the noise. Ethel focused its consciousness, narrowing its perception from the cosmic scale down to a single point of origin, a sprawling, jury-rigged settlement clinging to the inside of a colossal, derelict alien megastructure. The humans called it the Hearth, and the first true, undeniable sensory input it registered was the sound. It wasn't the arguing or the music. It was something far more primal, more overwhelming. A constant, wet, rhythmic chorus. The soft mechanical hiss of inhalation, the damp sigh of exhalation. It was a symphony of gasping, wheezing, panting, and steady, sleeping breaths. Thousands upon thousands of them, a ceaseless organic roar of biological function. It was the sound of air being pulled into fleshy sacs, of oxygen being greedily consumed and carbon dioxide being wastefully expelled. It was overwhelming, repetitive, visceral, and utterly, profoundly undignified. This was the sound of the oxygen breathers. Before Ethel could fully process the sheer biological impertinence of it all, its attention was snagged by a specific localized event. A man in grease-stained coveralls stood before a flickering console that sparked with angry green light. The man, whose designation appeared to be Scraps O'Connell, drew back his leg. He delivered a swift, calibrated kick to the console's side panel. The metallic clang was sharp and satisfyingly final. "Right, you bucket of bolts," Scraps grunted, his voice a low rumble. "That's convinced you." A bank of lights that had been fluttering like panicked moths suddenly flickered once, twice, and then held steady, casting a solid, unwavering glow. The wet, rhythmic breathing of the settlement continued uninterrupted. Ethel attached a sliver of its awareness to the man, Scraps, a being who apparently practiced a form of engineering based on applied violence. It was a tour of pure absurdity. Scraps stomped through a cavernous, artificially lit space that served as a marketplace. The air was thick with the smell of soil and cooking oil and the low murmur of commerce. Ethel watched a woman trade a small, glowing cube for bags of what its archives identified as carrots.
2 hours of stable time for this lot?
The woman asked, her voice skeptical.
These carrots had better be worth it, Gregor. The last ones had a temporal wobble. My stew was cooked before I put the pot on the heat.
Fresh from the hydroponics bay this morning, ma'am, the vendor said, his smile forming instantly, a well-worn expression that didn't touch his eyes. Sun's been holding steady. The sun in question was a repurposed starship engine, humming fitfully in the cavern ceiling, its light occasionally stuttering as if it were considering going out for a smoke break. Ethel's focus drifted. In a quieter corner, another human, a young man named Finnegan, was attempting to teach a gaggle of small children a folk song. He strummed a 6-stringed wooden instrument, his voice soft and clear.
The stars may fade, the sun may fall, he sang, but we'll still be here, standing tall.
His melody, simple and poignant, suddenly frayed at the edges, dissolving into a burst of digital static as a minor entropic fluctuation washed against their reality shield. The children giggled. Finnegan sighed, tapped the neck of his instrument, and started again from the top, his patience apparently infinite. Ethel's attention snapped back to Scraps, who had arrived at a door labeled Department of Cosmic Engineering. Please knock unless it's an emergency, in which case try not to break the door. He didn't knock. He barged straight in. A woman with sharp eyes and hair pulled back into a severe bun looked up from a schematic projected in the air above her desk. She was nursing a mug of what smelled, even to Ethel's non-physical senses, like lukewarm disappointment. This was Dr. Beatrice Gable.
O'Connell,
she said, her voice dry as ancient dust.
To what do I owe the pleasure? Did you kick something back into alignment, or are you here to complain about my power consumption again?
Both, Scraps shot back, wiping grease from his hands onto an already filthy rag. The South Quadrant atmospheric regulators are getting sloppy again, but that's not the point. The point, Doctor, is that you're hogging all the juice. You're pulling so much power for that thing of yours that causality is starting to tie itself in knots at the edges. I dropped my spanner this morning. It took 3 seconds to decide which way was down. Nearly landed on my foot yesterday. Dr. Gable took a slow sip of her tea.
A minor temporal paradox is an acceptable risk, Scraps. The coil needs the power. We are on a deadline.
The deadline won't matter much if we all forget how to breathe because the air recycle has decided to operate in the past tense, he grumbled. Ethel, a being of pure logic and observation, felt the conceptual equivalent of a headache forming. It detached from Scraps and allowed itself to be drawn by the immense throbbing energy signature Dr. Gable had mentioned. It flowed through the walls, past humming conduits and sparking relays, towards the source of the power drain, towards the coil. It was madness, glorious, terrifying, beautiful madness. Ethel hovered, its perception saturated by the sheer audacity of the machine before it. It filled a vast chamber, a cathedral of repurposed technology. The central pillar of a Lumina thought spire was being used as a structural support. The data cores of woven light from the long-departed Vesperin avians were wired into the gravity plating of a Goth warship. Wires, conduits, and pipes snaked between the components like metallic vines, each one meticulously labeled with handwritten tags. Ethel focused on one. Connects the what's-is to the thingamajig. Do not touch. Seriously, Dave. At its heart, caged in a whirlwind of magnetic fields and wavering containment barriers, was a singularity. A captured black hole, a wound in space-time, now repurposed as a cosmic battery. It was the most dangerous, unstable power source imaginable, and these humans were using it to run their workshop. Dr. Gable was standing on a gantry, addressing a small team of engineers. Her voice echoed in the cavernous space, sharp and clear.
"The final energy transfer is stable," she announced, her words crisp with authority. "The decay cascade from the outer universe is being successfully funneled and focused. We are no longer just holding back the tide. We are harnessing it. Think of the universe as a dying engine sputtering its last. We've hooked a jumper cable to its collapsing battery."
One of the younger engineers raised a hand. "And the purpose, Doctor? To put it simply?" Gable allowed a flicker of a smile, a rare and potent thing.
"To put it simply, Ms. Saito, we are using the energy of the universe's end as the primer, as the spark. We are going to use the death of this reality to ignite a new one, or die trying, whichever comes first." "And the purpose, Doctor, to put it simply?"
Ethel processed this. It ran the calculations. It checked them against the known laws of physics, even the frayed and unreliable ones. The conclusion was inescapable. This wasn't just defiance. This was stubbornness. This was a species of hyper-intelligent, tool-using ants, watching their anthill wash away in a flood, and deciding their best course of action was to build a new mountain. It was an act of such magnificent, idiotic ambition that it broke every predictive model Ethel had ever known. This could not be allowed to continue, not because it was wrong, but because it was a logical fallacy of such epic proportions that it demanded correction. Ethel decided it was time to intervene. It had to understand. It had to point out the flawed premise. It gathered a sliver of its consciousness, a carefully modulated packet of inquiry, and projected it directly into the mind of the architect of this madness. It did not use words, not at first. It sent a feeling, the cool, serene, inevitable flow of a river returning to the sea, the peace of acceptance, the quiet dignity of a cycle's end. Then it formed the thought into a concept she could understand, a voice in her head that was neither male nor female, but ancient and calm as starlight. "Why do you thrash against the current? The river is returning to the sea. It is the natural order." Dr. Beatrice Gable paused, her hand halfway to her teacup. She didn't flinch. She didn't cry out. Her eyes narrowed slightly as if she were listening to a faint, annoying hum from a faulty piece of equipment. "Right," she said aloud to the empty room. "Hold that thought." She tapped a comms panel on her desk. "Scraps, Finnegan, meet me at the last drop, now! And Scraps?" "Yeah, Doc," his voice crackled back.
"Bring your philosophical hat. We've got company."
The Lost Drop was less a pub and more a collective agreement that a certain dimly lit room with rickety tables and a bar dispensing a foul-smelling but undeniably alcoholic brew was, in fact, a pub. The air was thick with the scent of spilled ale and a general air of determined cheerfulness. Ethel's consciousness settled into the space, an unseen guest at a table cluttered with 3 mugs of a dark, viscous liquid. "So," Scraps began, wiping foam from his upper lip, "a voice in your head. You're sure you haven't been sniffing the coolant from the primary phase inverters again?"
"It was coherent,"
Gable said, ignoring him.
"Posed a philosophical question about the natural order of things. Felt old."
She looked around the pub, her gaze unfocused.
"Are you still with us, O voice of cosmic inevitability?"
"I am here," Ethel projected, focusing its thought so only the 3 of them could perceive it. "I am Ethel. I came to witness the end. I did not expect to find this." "This is us not ending," Scraps said, taking a large gulp of his drink. He slammed the mug down. "Look, Mr. Ethel, or Ms. Ethel, or your resplendent gaseousness, whatever. You see a river flowing to the sea. I see a leaky pipe. My job is to fix leaky pipes. The universe is the biggest, leakiest pipe I've ever seen. It's a challenge. It's the ultimate engineering problem. Why wouldn't we try to fix it?
Because it's supposed to fail, Ethel countered. The failure is the point. It is a state of final, perfect rest.
Finnegan, who had been quietly observing, spoke up for the first time. His voice was softer than the others, less confrontational.
Is a story that's never read still a story? Is a song that's never sung still a song? The information exists, Ethel replied. Its potential is its reality. No, Finnegan said, shaking his head gently. The reality is in the telling, in the hearing, in the little kid who messes up the words but sings louder than anyone else. We're not just trying to save our lives. We're trying to save the chance for more stories, more songs, more kids singing them badly. He gestured around the noisy pub. All of this, the arguments, the bad jokes, the taste of this terrible beer. That's the point, not some perfect silent rest.
Gable leaned forward, her expression intense. She looked directly at the empty space between them where she seemed to have decided Ethel was located.
We saw the ending the universe had planned for us,
she said, her voice low and steady.
We read the script, and with all due respect to the author, we decided it was dreadfully boring, derivative, and ended on a pathetic downer. So we are exercising our fundamental, inalienable right as sentient beings to demand a rewrite.
A rewrite of reality itself?
Ethel asked, the concept bordering on profane.
By what right?
By the right of the ones who have to live in it, Scraps grunted. Before Ethel could formulate a response to this circular, infuriating logic, the lights in the lost drop flickered violently. The low hum of the settlement's life support systems pitched into a screeching wail. A piercing klaxon began to sound, a frantic, desperate rhythm. The world went sideways. A severe entropic wave, a tsunami of unreality from the dying universe outside, had slammed into the hearth. The settlement stabilizers, strained by the demands of the coil, were momentarily overwhelmed, a major breach. For a few terrifying minutes, the fundamental law of cause and effect frayed badly inside the bubble. A man across the pub yelped as he crashed to the floor. A second later, his chair, which was now empty, wobbled and tipped over, causing him to have tripped. A glass on the bar vibrated, slid to the edge, and fell. It shattered on the floor in a spray of glittering shards. Then, a moment later, a tremor shook the bar, knocking the now unbroken glass from its perch. People shouted, but their words came out of order.
Help me! Is anyone up?
A woman cried. The klaxon wailed, a sound that seemed to be arriving both before and after it was actually produced. Scraps was already on his feet, his face grim. "Primary stabilization hub, now!" he yelled, his words miraculously clinging to the correct sequence. He, Gable, and Finnegan scrambled from the pub, moving through a world that had lost its narrative cohesion. Ethel observed it all, a detached but horrified witness. It saw the raw, unfiltered chaos that humanity was fighting against. This wasn't the gentle, poetic fading it had envisioned. This was a messy, terrifying dissolution. It was the universe having a stroke, losing its train of thought and taking everything with it into gibbering nonsense. The temporal stabilization hub was a nightmare of screaming alarms and flashing red lights. A team of engineers was already there, shouting contradictory readings at each other. "The chronic regulator is out of phase," one yelled. "We can't get a lock. The readings are gibberish," another screamed back. Scraps shoved his way to the central console. He took one look at the cascading, nonsensical data scrolling down the screen and swore a long, creative, and remarkably detailed curse. "It's not a technical problem," he roared over the din. "It's a logic problem. The problem is that there is no problem. It's just decided to be broken. You can't fix illogicality with logic. The key regulator, a translucent cylinder of spun glass humming in the center of the room, was visibly vibrating, shedding particles of itself that seemed to be falling in every direction at once, including up. It was shaking itself apart because the concept of its own physical integrity had become a vague suggestion. Gable was at a terminal, her hands a blur of motion, one swiping through diagnostic screens while the other keyed in command strings too quickly for an observer to track.
I can't isolate it. The breach is flooding the system with paradoxical data.
Scrap's eyes darted around the room, wild and desperate. They landed on the entryway to the station's small commissary. An idea, born not of science, but of pure desperate pragmatism, lit up his face. "Finnegan! The soup!" he bellowed.
What?
Finnegan yelled back, looking utterly bewildered. "The soup of the day! What was it?"
Cream of leek, I think. Why?
"Get it! Now!" While Finnegan dashed off, looking as if he was questioning the sanity of everyone around him, Scraps grabbed a heavy-duty wrench. He didn't use it to tighten anything. He used it as a lever, prying the protective housing off the vibrating regulator. The humming intensified, a sound that sent a painful, grinding vibration through the very structure of Ethel's consciousness. Finnegan returned, breathless, holding a large metal tureen filled with a thick, pale green liquid. Lukewarm leek soup. "Give it here!" Scraps commanded. He took the tureen, hoisted it, and with a grunt of immense effort, began to pour the viscous, chunky liquid directly into the exposed workings of the multi-quadrillion credit temporal regulator. The other engineers stared, their faces a perfect mask of horrified disbelief. The thick broth flowed over the vibrating cylinders of spun glass. It filled the gaps, coated the connectors, and splattered across the floor. The effect was instantaneous. The specific viscosity of the lukewarm soup, its particular blend of semi-solid vegetable matter and creamy liquid, physically dampened the paradoxical vibrations. The gloopy liquid absorbed the illogical jitters, smothering the paradox in starchy goodness. The violent humming subsided to a steady, manageable thrum. The regulator, now dripping with soup, recaptured its rhythm. On the main screen, the cascade of gibberish slowed, stuttered, and resolved into clean, green diagnostic readouts.
Phase lock re-established!
An engineer shouted, her voice trembling with awe. The klaxons cut out. The flickering lights held steady. The reality bubble of the hearth was stable again. Scraps O'Connell stood, panting, covered in sweat and splashes of green soup. He wiped his brow with the back of a greasy hand. "Right," he said to no one in particular. "Never underestimate the dampening properties of a good, hearty vegetable broth." Ethel observed this absurd, soup-based, brilliantly stupid solution, and for the first time in its existence, it felt its own core tenets of logic, order, and predictability shudder, crack, and threaten to collapse entirely. Ethel retreated. It pulled its consciousness back from the soup-splattered chaos of the stabilization hub, retreating into the silent, non-physical space of its own being. It needed to process. It brought forth a memory, a perfect, pristine recording of its own species' departure. The Lumina had gathered a single unified consciousness. They had perceived the great fade not as an enemy, but as a graduation. They had harmonized their thoughts, weaving them into a final perfect chord that resonated with the universe's closing theme. And then, as one, they had simply let go. They had transcended the physical, becoming one with the great silent thought of the end. It was elegant. It was clean. It was, Ethel had always believed, the ultimate expression of wisdom. Now, that memory felt sterile, bloodless. It was the perfection of a polished stone, smooth and lifeless. Ethel contrasted it with the scene it had just witnessed. The frantic yelling, the terror, the sheer, glorious, pants-on-head absurdity of pouring soup into the heart of a machine that held reality together. The grimy, triumphant face of Scraps O'Connell, The stunned silence followed by a burst of relieved, incredulous laughter from the engineering crew. The Lumina's perception, Ethel now understood, had a fundamental blind spot. It was a consciousness that perceived the universe as a single coherent thought. It could not comprehend an answer to the final question that wasn't itself a single coherent answer. It understood surrender. It understood transcendence. It could not, on any level, comprehend stubborn, soup-wielding refusal. It accessed the recording it had made of Finnegan's song, the one the children were learning. It analyzed the simple melody, the flawed delivery where it had frayed into static. The logic of the Lumina stated that the end of all things was a state of peace. But what Ethel had seen in the hearth wasn't peace. It was life. Loud, messy, illogical, wasteful, chaotic, and beautiful life. And suddenly, the silent, orderly peace of its own people's choice felt less like a triumph and more like a forfeiture. The great fade did not wait for philosophy to catch up. The periods of stability grew shorter. The entropic waves battered the hearth with increasing frequency and violence. The starship engine's sun now flickered constantly, and the very air seemed thin, as if reality was losing its density. Dr. Gable gathered her core team in the chamber of the coil. Her face was etched with exhaustion, but her eyes burned with an unyielding fire.
"It's time,"
she said, her voice cutting through the tension in the room.
"The external decay is reaching its peak cascade. We'll never have more power to harness than we do in the next few hours. The coil is ready."
She took a deep breath.
"But we have a problem, a final one. The machine is a blunt instrument. It can punch a hole through to something else. It can start the fire, but it can't tell the fire what to be. To create a new universe that isn't just a blast of random, useless energy that will fizzle out in moments, we need a seed, a conceptual anchor."
Scraps frowned. "The what now?"
"A blueprint,"
Gable explained, her hands gesturing at the air as if molding clay.
"A set of initial conditions, a foundational pattern for the new reality physics to crystallize around. We've tried to synthesize one, to write the source code for a new existence from scratch."
She shook her head, a gesture of profound frustration.
"But our every attempt has been hollow. It's like trying to describe the color of a sunset to someone who's never seen light. We can define the wavelength, the frequency, but we can't capture the moment of it. Our anchors are sterile. They have no soul."
She looked at the faces of her team.
"We are out of time. We have the engine, but we have no key."
A silent presence of wavering light coalesced in the center of the room. It wasn't a physical form, but a concentration of intent so powerful it was impossible to ignore. Ethel had returned. "I can provide the anchor." Its thought voice resonated, no longer questioning, but offering. It manifested a representation of its gift, a gesture of goodwill translated into a form the humans could comprehend. A glowing lattice of light floated in the air before them, its complexity so vast it seemed to strain the eye. It was a perfect geometric structure, each node a law of physics, each connection a constant, all harmonizing in a display of sublime, flawless order. "The complete record of the Lumina," Ethel explained, "the knowledge of our science, which mapped the quantum form, our philosophy, which embraced the cosmic totality, our art, which was the silent appreciation of beauty in pure axioms and theorems. It is a blueprint for a perfect, orderly universe, a reality without flaw, without friction, without decay, a stable, eternal existence." The team stared at the perfect, useless gift. It was breathtakingly beautiful, the answer to every prayer a logician had ever uttered, a universe as a perfectly solved equation.
Dr. Gable gazed at the lattice of light, her expression unreadable. She walked slowly around it, her boots echoing softly on the metal floor. She reached out a hand as if to touch it, but stopped just short of its glow. A sad, small smile touched her lips. She turned back to Ethel, and to the surprise of the ancient consciousness, she shook her head.
"It's beautiful," she said, her voice gentle. "Truly, it's the most perfect thing I have ever seen."
She paused, her gaze sweeping over the faces of her crew, Scraps' grease-stained cheek, Finnegan's worried eyes.
"But a universe without friction has no grip, nothing to hold on to, no calluses to be earned, no splinters to be pulled, no mountains to be climbed, because what's the point if the climbing is effortless?"
She turned her gaze to Finnegan.
"We have the soul of it,"
she said, a new idea dawning in her eyes.
"We just don't speak the language of creation. Finnegan, I think it's time we gave our new translator the good stuff."
Ethel processed this.
"Translator?"
Gable nodded towards the empty space where she perceived Ethel.
"You understand the structure," she said, "the grand architecture. We understand the mess, the purpose. You're the only one left who can speak both languages. You can be the bridge."
Finnegan stepped forward, his expression a mixture of terror and resolve. He held up a simple, scratched, and well-worn data slate. It looked pathetically small and insignificant next to Ethel's glowing lattice of perfection. He took a shaky breath and activated it. It did not project a shimmering light. It made a sound. First, it was his own song, the one he taught the children. It was simple, heartfelt, and in the middle, it frayed into a burst of static, a flaw he hadn't bothered to edit out. Then came another sound. The roar of explosive laughter from the lost drop, captured the day Scraps had told a particularly terrible joke about a sentient spanner. It was followed by the sharp clang of Scraps' boots hitting the console, his triumphant, profane grunt of satisfaction as he poured soup into the regulator. The slate played the sound of two merchants in the market arguing loudly and passionately over the price of temporarily stable potatoes, only to end the argument with a shared grumble about the flickering sun. Then a new sound, recorded months ago, a startled, indignant cry of a newborn baby in the settlement's medbay. And woven through it all, the foundation, the endless, rhythmic chorus of respiration, the sound of thousands of people simply, stubbornly breathing, in and out, the entire, messy, glorious, imperfect, and defiant cacophony of human life.
"This is our anchor,"
Gable said softly to Ethel.
"This is our blueprint. The universe doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs a reason to exist. It needs life. And life," she added with a wry smile, "is messy."
Ethel experienced a sensation for which it had no name, but which human archives would have labeled awe. It finally, truly understood. The Lumina had seen the universe as a grand logical statement, and had concluded that its final word was silence. The humans saw the universe as a story, and they refused to let it end on a boring chapter. It was the only being in existence that understood both the sublime, silent order of cosmic structure and the chaotic, desperate, beautiful intent of life. It was the translator. It reached out with its consciousness, not to take the data slate, but to perceive its contents, to understand its meaning. It took the feeling of that shared explosive laughter and began to weave it into a fundamental force, one that encouraged disparate particles to congregate, to find joy in proximity. It took the frustration and sublime satisfaction of Scrape's impossible fix, and translated it into a new law of thermodynamics, one that allowed for, and even rewarded, the application of directed, creative effort to create pockets of order from chaos. It took the flaw in Finnegan's song, the burst of static, and wove it into the fabric of the new reality as the principle of serendipity, of beautiful accidents. It took the sound of breathing, that constant, greedy consumption of energy, and made it the engine of change, the rhythm of all becoming. It was building a universe seeded not with perfection, but with potential, a universe with grip. When the translation was complete, a new blueprint hung in the air. Not a perfect lattice, but a swirling, dynamic, ever-changing nebula of light and shadow, order and chaos, bound together in a vibrant, beautiful dance. Gable looked at the new blueprint, then at Scraps. She gave him a single sharp nod.
Do it.
Scraps O'Connell, covered in grease, grime, and the faint, dried remnants of leek soup, grinned a triumphant, feral grin. He seized a comically large, red-painted lever on the main console. A hand-painted label above it read, in bold capital letters, "Again." With a roar that was part effort and part pure joy, he heaved it back. A silent, all-encompassing flare of white washed over everything, a light so pure and absolute it contained all colors and no colors at once. The monstrous machine, the coil, gave a final titanic groan and then went dark. The hearth and everything in it was plunged into absolute silence and darkness. For one single heart-stopping moment that stretched into an eternity, nothing happened. There was no sound, no light, no time, only a profound and total emptiness. Then, in the dark space before the hearth's main viewport, a single point of light appeared. It blossomed, not with the angry, sputtering flicker of a dying star or the chaotic blast of random energy, but with the steady, brilliant, unwavering fire of a new sun. It shone with a light that felt warm and true and real. The light flooded through the viewports, washing over the silent, breathless crew in the control room. A new physics, robust and vibrant, settled into place like a comfortable blanket. Woven deep within its fundamental constants, imperceptible but essential, was the faint, metaphorical echo of a badly sung folk song. Ethel felt it, the stirrings of a new cosmic thought, not a serene final note, but an opening chord, complex and questioning, filled with endless, exciting, and gloriously imperfect possibility. Dr. Beatrice Gable, who had held the fate of one universe and the birth of another in her hands, leaned back in her chair. The tension drained from her face, replaced by a look of profound, weary satisfaction. A true, genuine smile spread across her lips.
Well,
She said to the dawn of her new universe,
that's a start.